All right, guys, hello. I am Perry Nemroff from Collider, and right now we are at the exclusive Collider screening of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I get a sense that you guys like this movie. I have a lot of questions for you guys. I want to kick this off by going back to the very beginning. And Phil, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the whole idea of anyone can wear the mask, because that idea just runs through all of the veins of this movie from start to finish. And I know that's where all of this started. So what sparked that idea in your head?
Well, I mean, when Sony and Amy and Avi came to us about making a Spider-Man cartoon, we thought, that the original idea that Stan Lee and Steve Ditko had was, this is a superhero who's like all of us. He's vulnerable, he's not sure if he's any good at this. He's not like a handsome dude from outer space. He's, it democratized the idea of a superhero. So we immediately thought that Miles' story was the modern equivalent of Peter's, and wanted to explore what it would be like to tell a movie from his point of view. And that was kind of the whole impetus for us, because we thought that was such an amazing refresh of the whole idea, and yet it is so, it reinforces the things that we like about Spider-Man to begin with.
It certainly plays like that. And Chris, I want to know when you jumped in here, because we almost know the two of you as your own name in and of itself, Lord and Miller, and I know you guys write a lot together, but you did not share a screenwriting credit on this movie. So at what point do you jump in and start working on this?
Hey guys. I jumped in right at the beginning of that same moment when Sony came to us and said, what about a Spider-Man animated movie? And we discussed for like a few weeks how we could make that something interesting and good. And it was basically, we could tell Miles Morales' story. Guys.
Even share a microphone.
It's glitching.
Hey guys. We could tell Miles Morales' story, and we also could use animation to tell a story in a way that had never been seen, in a way that made it feel like you were walking inside a living comic book. And those are the two things that got us excited. At the time, we were very busy, and unlike right now, so we were a little bit divide and conquer on the stuff, but I was involved with the writing process from the very beginning also, but it was really Phil who put all the muscle in. So yeah, that's how it started.
So we're really fortunate right now to have all three directors sitting here to talk about the movie they made, but I want to pose this question to you guys first. Why did this specific movie need three directors? Because I feel like I've covered a number of movies where it's got two directors on an animated movie. Three seems like a lot.
Did you see how ambitious this movie was?
Didn't notice.
It was really hard.
Look, the movie's really dense, and what we said the other night was, anybody up here could have directed this movie. It just would have been a lot worse. Everybody could have done this by themselves. The fact that we were able to all have such a successful collaboration together, and that these three guys decided to back each other up and support one another's individual superpowers is the reason why it's so great and layered, and why it's firing on all cylinders, in my opinion, is that everybody can, you feel everybody's individual artistry on the screen. It's not a situation where three people shave what's interesting about one another down to the nub until they deliver this boring sphere of a film. This is like guys pumping up one another's strengths and championing one another in a way that I thought was really beautiful.
So given that, do you guys work together the entire time and continue to champion each other, or do each of you specialize in one specific area of this production?
Well, it's more the former. Essentially, like, because of the way this movie is, it was it was a really ambitious movie that required, new technology, new code to be written, and from the very beginning, it had, kind of grand ambitions, but no one had any idea how to do it. Like that. We all kind of looked at each other like, I don't know how to do that. Do you know how to do that? And so the production was like pre-production and production and post-production all at the same time the whole time. So it was like running like multiple relay races at the same time, and you're just kind of running back and forth, to do like so. So on any given day, Bob might be in animation, or Peter might be in layout, or with the board artists, I might be writing, I might be in edit. The next day we all might be in digital review. There's all these things that are happening, and the edit room was sort of like our mission control. We'd all meet back there most days and look at what we had, and and the movie kind of always won. The movie would sort of tell us as we went what it wanted to be, and everyone had ideas that worked, and everyone had ideas that did not work, and that's in the end, we're all I was really gratified by the experience, because I was, I don't know, like I do feel like we all made the movie together, and it's now today it's a really cool feeling.
And it did get a lot simpler and more streamlined after we got rid of the other 4 guys.
That's true.
True.
Earlier, right?
They glitched.
These are the surviving directors.
Yeah. No, I mean, the other thing, I mean, this movie that you guys just saw, I think in total is like 117 minutes. The very first cut, animatic of at that time it had a special name called Cabin Fever. It was 3 hours long. So there was a lot of material that had to be sort of formed and focused onto how it could help it support Miles, and also how it could help not confuse the audience, because that was a big challenge initially, especially when you're looking, when you look at it in its final form, it feels really cohesive, but when you try to represent that stuff in storyboards, it's really complicated. So there was just a lot of just getting each other's backs and fresh eyes. Everywhere we went, it was like fresh eyes. Like we're all fighting different battles, and then you kind of tire of the one you're in, and then you're like, I think I'm going to go over to this room for a while, and we'll switch. And I think we all learned from each other a lot. I mean, all 5 of us, I think.
Absolutely.
And it felt like a really rewarding experience.
Can you guys talk a little? I'm sorry, if you want to continue.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, that on top of that, it actually was a pretty brisk production. I mean, it was 3 years, more or less, from a little over 3 years from start to finish, really from start to finish. So that's, for animation, man, that's lickety-split. So it took us 1.5 years just to kind of start nailing down the actual look and feel, technically and visually, of the film. And from then on, there was like no time to take a breath.
I feel like it's important to point out, just to kind of paint a clear picture here. I was reading that in most animated movies cases, it takes something like 1 week to animate 4 seconds, and for this movie, it's 1 week to animate 1 second. So,
And we got there eventually. Like initially, we weren't there, so we were feeling pretty good.
Oh, that was top speed.
That was.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
I think at the very, very end, there were a handful of people who'd been on from the very beginning, and they were. Depending on the complexity of the shot, but they were hitting a little bit larger numbers than that. But that was the average, which is kind of unbelievable.
Can you guys talk a little bit more about paring down that original cut of the film, and actually maybe even taking it back to draft 1 compared to what we see here? What things had to go? Is there anything you wish could still be in there?
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think the bones of the screenplay from the really long draft stayed pretty similar. There was just a lot, it was, a lot of the job was just, getting it, more concise, and to some extent finding the signal in the noise, but a lot of the, it really didn't change that much in certain fundamental ways. I would say that as we pared it down, we focused a lot more on Miles and his family. That suggested itself pretty early as what felt like the heart of the movie. So that was very then it became very easy to start lifting things out. And then I'm trying to think. I mean, we didn't cut any characters. What else?
I mean, I think there's, I mean, another rare thing I think for an animated film, or I know for an animated film, is that there's animation, finished animation that's on the cutting room floor, and there's about 10 minutes of that from this movie, which is a really high number. And there's one scene specifically that was just like one that we all really loved, but the movie just kept pushing it out. It was like a splinter. And then your body's just like, nope, you're not going to fit there. Get out.
I have a great Blu-ray.
Yeah, definitely.
The alternate universe cut.
My next question right there. Speaking of putting this whole thing together, and the focus on family, that comes through so strong, but Miles almost has two families in this movie. So can you tell me a little bit about deciding who specifically of the spider people was going to be in his group and how you settled on these specific characters?
Well, from the beginning, the idea was we want to tell Miles' story, and it would be fun to have an older, kind of washed up Peter Parker be his Mr. Miyagi, and wouldn't that be a fun dynamic? So that was with the second, or I guess the third mentor for Miles.
Except Mr. Miyagi isn't wise.
Exactly.
And he has nothing to offer. The idea was like, what moves are left for Peter Parker that haven't been explored yet? And we really thought, let's put him in an emotional position that he doesn't know anything about, where he's not an expert, where instead of like the little squirt who's looking up to other people or being like a jokester in the back of the class, he's the guy who's got to be the teacher all of a sudden.
And to make that happen, the idea of opening up the multiverse to have a new version of Peter show up to train him left a big multiverse-shaped door open, and we kind of got carried away. But Gwen was the first easy choice because she's awesome. And with the other ones, it was sort of trying to pick characters who looked nothing like each other and could be animated in completely different styles, like a black and white character, an anime character, a kind of crazy old-timey cartoon character, and that they all had different world experiences and points of view on the world so that they could all say, like, look, doesn't matter where you're from, if you're a boy or a girl, how old you are, what your experience is, we all have been through this, you're not alone, and we became heroes and you can be one too.
It's a special message that really comes through. It makes me very thankful that we're all going to be able to share this with our friends and family very soon now. To follow up on something that you were just explaining, when did you guys realize that this was actually working? Because even when you're just lining up all of the different spider people...
In the wings over there. About 10 minutes ago.
Between all of these crazy characters and then the animation challenge, are you kind of just sitting there one day reviewing some footage and saying, like, oh, it really worked. We really got this here.
I remember that time when we've been working really hard on trying to get the style of the movie to feel like what we all imagined it could be. And this one shot, we started with a bunch of really dark scenes because we couldn't figure out how to make it look good in the light. But there was the first real shot was a wide shot of Miles running down the street after he figured out he had these sticky powers, and he's calling his Uncle Aaron, and there's a wide shot, and when it all came together, and we finally got it to feel right, we all looked at each other and were like, this is it! This looks amazing! This looks like nothing I've ever seen! And we all got really excited and kind of jumped up and down.
Yeah, it seemed like a super easy description of like exterior, afternoon, Brooklyn Street, and then it took,
We were
really
good
long time to figure out how to make it.
We could make it look good in the dark. And then, so like the first thing we did is that one of those like subway chases.
It was the Prowler chase.
The Prowler chase, which we were all like so excited and patting each other on the back, and then we were like, oh no, we went outside, and we didn't know how to make that look good. It just looked complicated.
It still looks complicated.
Yeah.
It works, but
It is.
I watched this movie and I've seen it twice now, and I am still in awe of every single new texture, new style of lighting, just the color palette overall. If you were to pick one striking piece of your animation technique here and call it the most difficult one to pull off, what would it be?
I mean, I think
I imagine the list goes on.
there's
and on.
well, no, but I think at its because of where we are with CGI animation and how it's had enough time to sort of grow up into an adult and have be set in its ways. The fact that all of this animation is on twos, which if you don't know what that means, it just means that there's 24 frames in a second, and as opposed to having 24 images, so 24 different images per second, we have 12 on the characters, and that's how traditional animation, hand-drawn animation, used to be. And it's sort of like it holds just long enough before you realize something's not moving, and then it moves, and it really helps have a greater impact and tells a stronger visual story, much like a comic book does. A lot of impact with one panel. But when you make that, it seems so simple. Like, let's do half the work. But really it meant, like, let's do 4 times the work. Because everything else in the whole pipeline was set up for a new image every frame, like simulations and camera and all of that stuff. So we had to really task our amazing crew with trying to figure out how to make it work. And it was not easy.
I know we don't want to put the cart before the horse, so to speak, but there was a recent announcement that we could get more of these movies. So having gone through all of that on this particular production, looking ahead, do you kind of foresee maybe a seamless, fluid way of churning out these movies with this visual style?
Probably not.
Never gonna happen.
No.
I think the thing we're all hoping is that there's another leap forward, from what was done here, that there's got to be, you're talking about, this turned out to be the perfect way to tell Miles' story in his, his environment, his home, his world. Hopefully with other characters, there's going to be something about their stories that lends itself to, another cool, as yet unforeseen way to use the medium to be super expressive and really specific. I mean, I think there's a lot of basic concepts or basic, I don't know, technique's not the right word, but just basic notions that propelled a lot of the thinking on this that you could apply to a lot of things, but you've got to be flexible and responsive to the story.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately for Sony Pictures, ImageWorks, who did an amazing job on this movie, I feel like most of the people that worked on this movie are the kind of people that would want to just throw a bunch of that stuff away and try something different.
I think Danny actually did. I heard him in his office going like, "No one else will ever have this." And he pushed a button. I'm not sure what happened, but
he had a really big magnet.
That's amazing. I mean, it is true that these movies are handmade, and everyone up here, that's what gets us excited. We want everything to be bespoke, and that means that everything we make is going to be a prototype on some kind of another. Our amazing production designer, Justin Thompson, is like, okay, great, this is a good start. But another movie is going to have to look way more far out than this.
And hopefully 10 years from now, we'll look back on this movie and say, like, wow, that was really conservative. I guess it was crazy for the time.
Speaking of the environment you build for Miles here, I am a New Yorker, and watching New York on that screen in this style, even though the style is so wild and unique, there's something about it that felt very true to New York and very, I guess I would say, loving towards New York too. So can you guys talk a little bit about designing that, and how many things in this movie are specifically based on buildings, subway stations, all of that?
I mean, all of it came, sprung out of initially just a location scout, as if we were doing a live action film, going into subway tunnels, on trains. We had the pleasure of having there's one train that runs under Times Square where they'll let you stop the train and it was and get and so we did a ton of reference there. We went on top of buildings. Spent a lot of time in Brooklyn, and the goal was to really just represent New York in a way. It's such a special place in this movie, but also in America, and what it represented for America, and what it represented for where Marvel came from, and a lot of graffiti and hip hop culture, and all those things were sort of born out of the boroughs of New York, and so this was an attempt to make a love letter to New York and imbue each neighborhood and every single shot with a feeling of New York, something that you could feel it bouncing onto our characters and realize that it was tangible.
We didn't have to shoot Toronto for New York in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, one of the coolest things about animation is that it doesn't have to look real; it just has to feel real. So especially with New York, I mean, yeah, like, the goal is to capture what it feels like to walk down the street in New York, not what it looks like, which is a cool challenge,
Success. Brought me right back home. I also wanted to ask you guys about Easter eggs, because this movie's packed with them. I told you before, this is my second time seeing it, and there's no way I caught even the slightest fraction of everything that you kind of hid throughout this entire movie. So I know we don't want to give too many spoilers away for people who are watching this Q&A that haven't seen the movie, but if you had one Easter egg to pinpoint that you're really excited for people to see, which one would you choose?
We obviously didn't get these questions in advance.
One thing I'll say is this movie takes place in an alternate universe that's like our universe, but not our universe. And that's the premise that we operated under. So, one thing we did is we contacted people we knew who were authors or filmmakers or musicians, and we asked them, what would you make in an alternate universe? And they all gave us projects that they thought they would make in an alternate universe, and those projects are scattered throughout the city. If you freeze on a cab as it goes by, it's going to have an advertisement for a book that an author suggested, or movies, or albums, or whatever.
And you let Collider participate, and we made the Collider machine.
That's right.
Yes,
we name dropped you a lot.
Obviously.
Yes. Rodney, how did Hold Your Horses come to be?
Hold Your Horses. I contacted Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, and I said, what movie would you make in an alternate universe? And they pitched something that was really funny that was not that. And that was it. I was off to the races. And then like a few days later, Evan emailed and he said, Hold Your Horses. You can't use that one. We might actually make that movie. So then I was just like, okay, I'm going to make a movie called Hold Your Horses. And Seth, you're going to be a jockey. And Seth hasn't seen how enormous it is in the movie yet, or how many shots it's right in back of, but he will soon.
There's a pretty cool, anytime anybody from the Morales family makes a phone call and tries to look up somebody in their contacts, they got some pretty cool friends, so that's kind of fun.
Yeah, definitely. There are so many Easter eggs. I don't want to spoil any that would sort of take any special thing away from someone finding them. But I have my own personal Easter eggs in there, and because this movie took us all away from our families quite often, I had my kids tag their names inside the tunnels, and my wife. So there are 3 or 4 shots where I can go, I was thinking about you, see? I know I wasn't here when you went to bed, and then when you woke up I was gone too, but I was still thinking about you.
Anything you guys want to throw in? Or keep it all secret?
Let's keep it a secret.
Oh, look at that.
All right, no, fine.
Clone College.
There's Clone College, the long-awaited sequel to Clone High as a film. That's a good one. There's Bob Persichetti is being carried by Spider-Man on the cover of a comic book based on the original.
I needed a lot of help.
One of my favorite Easter eggs in this movie is the cameo we get of Stan Lee, and I will just say that is hands down my favorite Stan Lee cameo I have ever seen in any movie. It's a moment that just really encapsulates what his work has meant to so many people. So I wanted to know about your experience working with him on that moment and how you guys came up with that specific scene.
Who wants to talk? I think that scene, that you're looking for a special moment for that cameo. And we were, I think as you said the other day, Phil, was like, sure, he could drive a bus, he could do all these other things, but how could we make it really meaningful, and how could we make it represent something that just like struck the core of what he meant to so many people? And so it was like he should give Miles his first costume, what we called the store-bought costume. And then I think you had written it, and then you took another crack at it, and was that backwards, or is that right?
I literally don't remember.
I don't know. This is how collaborative it was. Like truly,
There were lines flying around. On
it
text
really.
chain.
I feel like I'm completely responsible for it.
Okay.
Because I actually kind of feel the same way.
Yeah, I think that's how the whole thing, like, that's how you know it's success, is that everybody's psyched about it.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
think they did everything.
Exactly. But it was really it was already this super poignant thing because we recorded him a couple weeks after his wife had passed away. So the lines already had this. They were just like multi-layered and like pregnant with like so much meaning. And then a funny part of it was that, of course, we had this huge animation crew, and everybody wanted those shots. Everybody wanted to animate Stan, and our head of animation was holding him for himself. And Josh Beveridge, he's a
god,
serious trooper, but he ended up having to give them out to animators, and it was so hard for him. But in the performance that they wrung out of his performance, it just like hit this next level. And then obviously now, I think the first time we saw it used to just always start with just like a giant scream. People would just be like, yes, here's that moment. And now it's like you hear like all these sort of emotional, almost like guttural reactions to seeing him, and then you hear what he's saying, and it's so meaningful, and it has even more layers. And I've never seen, I think, I can't remember which screening it was where we saw it the first time after he had passed away, but I'd never seen so many emotions from a community. There was this community of people sitting in there, and they were all just like bouncing back and forth, because in the end, it's also funny, and it is representative of sort of the cantankerous nature of him, because there are no refunds ever.
It was a really, really nice, meaningful touch. So thank you guys for putting the time and care into handling that in such a meaningful way to so many fans out there that he affected. All of this, and we haven't even spoken about getting into the sound booth, the recording process for this. And I know you got a couple people in your cast here who have never done any animated voice work before. So day one, what do you tell them to kind of get their feet wet?
You kind of have to just get them to relax, and it's really informal. There's no cameras, there's not a lot of crew standing around. It's just, us hanging out in a T-shirt and whatever else, and just a T-shirt. Yeah.
It's really
Well,
informal.
hey, I like to relax them, man. It doesn't work, but for some reason, but I don't know. And you just kind of want to put them at ease and give them the feel that it's more like you're workshopping a play, or and there's they can keep doing the lines as much as they feel like they need to. We've got the script pages right there, and once they start relaxing into the rhythm of it, and we always encourage them to put as much of themselves as they would like to into the lines, even if that means changing the written word, altering that a little bit, something that's more in line with what they would actually say or what they'd feel in the moment, as long as it communicated the idea. And they really start to get into it, because you can take away all the externals and a lot of the other concerns that you have when you're acting in live action, and it just becomes this intimate thing with the actor and their voice and their imagination. And I think to a person, they loved it.
To flip that around now, I wanted to ask about working with a voice acting veteran like Lily Tomlin, and then also, how is it working with Nick Cage? Because him in particular, seeing him on screen, I could feel like the fun he's having in that role is just like radiating off of it.
Yeah.
I thought about Nick Cage. It's hard to work with him and not have your brain constantly screaming, "It's Nick Cage," over and over again, super loud. that's just like a given. He was great. I mean, I don't know what I expected. Maybe I was a little scared, but he was. It turns out that he's a wildly experienced performer who's very professional. And he shows up and he just kind of does an awesome job, and you can direct him and he'll do it differently. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, we loved working with him. He was, and obviously he had fun with it. And you do tend to over prepare for Nick Cage because it's just kind of like, what would it be funny just to make Nick Cage say, And you end up writing like an extra 20 lines just to like hear him say it, even though you know it's not going to be for the movie.
Can you give us one alt take? One specific thing you wrote for Nick Cage that we don't say?
I mean, like in the movie, he what does he say in the movie about the turtle? Wait, you biscuit boxer?
Biscuit boxing.
Yeah,
is
you
where
biscuit
we ended
box.
up.
We literally had him record like 50 different weird slangs. Like you turtle slapper. You like everything. I mean, it's like what else?
A lot of them would have gotten us an NC-17.
Yeah. We literally had him record something, and then it was in the movie, and then
animated, and like hilarious.
Yeah, and then someone bothered to Google it, and it turned out to be like a filthy pornographic act, and we had to spend a lot of money.
It wasn't from the 30s at all.
Yeah, what was it? Wait, what was it?
It was like 3 or 4 in a row that turned out to be gross.
I don't think.
Yeah.
Should we? Is that something?
I don't feel like we should reveal.
I don't either.
It being recorded
Fair enough,
for posterity.
Yeah, because spoilers.
Exactly, but I remember going on various different websites looking for 30 slang and trying to like text you every variant there possible. It was super fun. He's great.
I have no appropriate transition for this, but I'm getting the wrap-up sign, and I wanted to end with this question because I feel like you guys made a movie that's going to be very important to a lot of people out there, people who are already Spider-Man fans and people who don't know that they are yet. So can you tell me a little bit about what is it about this interpretation of Spider-Man in this specific cinematic world that you are most excited to share with the world? Pressure's on.
I think for me, and part of the whole reason this movie is about Miles Morales is that it, that idea of anybody can wear the mask, and how telling a story with somebody who's as different from Peter Parker as Miles Morales is, both in terms of ethnicity and the fact that he's got a family where he lives, also just in time. Peter Parker was conceived back in '61. This is 2018. All those things, and yet when you wrap the iconic myth of Spider-Man around this new character, it's kind of the same. All the things that make Spider-Man great and all the things that have made that character endure all these years, they're exactly the same, and the same things are like really strong and powerful about him, even though it's a totally different character. So to me, it just like goes like, man, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, they really came up with something enduring. It is Rodney one day said, yeah, it really is a myth, and it is. It's a pretty powerful thing.
Who can top that?
No one.
Yeah, no one. I don't think so. I was going to say radioactive puberty, so I don't think that tops it.
That might top it.
Just did.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. Guys, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please
Thanks for having
give them
us.
a
Thank
round
you.
of applause.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
you.
you guys for being here tonight. Don't forget, tell everybody you know, Into the Spider-Verse hits theaters on December 14th. This is your exclusive Collider screening Q&A.
Thank you.
Thank you.